Well, hello, welcome back to training. Tim Warner here, and I'm going to teach you about LLM context windows. And this is a lesson born out of bitter experience. I have to say, as a tech trainer, not much makes me cringe harder than realizing that I've been teaching incomplete or maybe even factually incorrect information. And it turns out that I've been pretty incomplete in how I've been presenting context windows in large language models, wholly due to my own ignorance. But now that I'm sorted, I want to, as an atonement, make this video and pass it on, and certainly for future training engagements will be more on point. First of all, in an LLM or large language model, what do we mean by a context window? Well, this is the data, the tokens, the atomic units that the LLM breaks your prompts down into. Let's assume text or source code for now. The tokens that are included in every request to the model. And also, the context window is going to contain messages from the AI, any metadata, system instructions, dev instructions. If you're using RAG or retrieval augmented generation, we've got retrieved data, file attachments, which again overlaps with RAG. If you're using MCP or a proprietary tool calling protocol, the outputs there. Basically, it's your chat history within a single chat. And the bottom line is these LLMs have different finite fixed lengths. Google historically in Gemini has had the longest. We don't need to get into the weeds other than to say the longer the window, the more of this context there is before the AI starts to eject stuff that it thinks is irrelevant and starts to hallucinate, which is what we want to avoid always with these LLM communications. Now, my major malfunction, my incomplete picture here, is that I've historically looked at in the context of a single chat that your context window is basically like a scrolling chat window that you would have on your mobile device, where the old stuff might fall off on the top. Now, that's not going to happen with text messages, but basically, if you think about first in, first out logging, if you're a developer or an IT person, you understand this. I would explain it like, let me go into whiteboard mode here, is that, as that context window gets filled up with messages from you, system messages, AI, attachment, and so on, eventually when you get to the end, the earliest stuff goes away and the AI starts becoming increasingly forgetful. Now, it is true that when the LLM reaches its limit, either depending upon the platform, the surrounding application, it could force you into a new context, a new conversation. But assuming it doesn't do that, the AI will start to eject stuff out of context, and it will get more amnesic. The more correct way to look at context window, if you're a visual learner like I am, is to think about it instead of a circular log, think about it as a round table where everyone speaks at once. And I remember as a kid going to summer camp and we would sit around the bonfire, and to prevent everybody from talking at once, you'd pass a baton and the person holding the baton would have the floor. Think of it more like that way. And that we as developers, or even frankly as end users chatting with the AI, have a spotlight control where we can shine in that context window on what matters. Now, unless you're a developer, you don't have as much visibility. In fact, with AIs that we use as software as a service like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and M365 Copilot, the AI gives you very little insight indeed as to how far through you've burned your token context. So that means you as a user, it's on you. The onus is on you to wield that spotlight effectively, to make sure that you shine on, in the context, what matters and let go of what doesn't. And so the more correct way to look at context window is more radially. Let me again bring out my drawing controls. I think of like a heat map diagram or a radial diagram. Think of it being in the middle and then gradienting out. Really, as you'll learn in just a second, the way these LLMs tend to work, the middle is actually the risk zone. We're more concerned with the beginning and the end of a single chat than we are in the middle. It's called a U-curve. And this is all quantitatively demonstrated in the literature as well, that in the conversation, the start of the context window is high recall. It's a hot zone. But the middle of the context is you're going turn by turn, especially if you start throwing in off-topic prompts at the AI. I mean, maybe you're doing a Python script, and then you say, oh, by the way, can you tell me when this store opens in my zip code tomorrow? You know, the middle of the context is a risk zone, and that is an area that's much more rife, according to the literature, for being ejected out of context. Lower recall, more misses. And then what you're doing most recently would be the end of context, the hot zone. Do you see that? So it's almost like the LLM thinks what the user's doing immediately is most important, but we also want to think of where we started from. And then in the middle, that would be very good candidate for ejection out of the window. So what does that mean? Putting critical info at the start. In chess, the first move is so important and worth so much analysis. It's called the opening gambit. I'll use that same vocabulary in terms of LLM prompting. Unless I'm at the drugstore, and I just want to say, hey, which of these antihistamines is best for my cat? I don't really have to think about that too much. But if I'm doing a more formal project, like, frankly, I'm getting ready to take my 15-year-old daughter Zoe on vacation up north, and I'm thinking, well, I want some help in sights and sounds and places to go and things to do. I want to put some thought into that opening gambit prompt because it's going to set the tone and be more keyed for retrieval on the part of the LLM. And then, of course, where you are currently. The end is really your current, the most recent thing the AI said to you and what you're getting ready to say back to it. You want to make sure that that's highest impact, okay? How can we do this? I find that the Python developers with be explicit or explicit is better than implicit, generally speaking. Structure helps the model find information that it needs. So what does that mean practically from a prompt engineering standpoint? I've had good luck using semantic tagging like Markdown or XML. Now, if you don't know what those are, that's your homework assignment. But Markdown is a way to use symbols to mark up plain text to convey meaning. Things like headings. Level 1 heading would be considered more global or higher priority than a level 2 heading. You can do unordered lists, bullet lists, in other words, that don't necessarily denote any preference or hierarchy, or you could use a numbered list to denote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see what I'm saying? You can use bold or italics and this sort of stuff. And as you can see on this slide, you could, in your opening prompt, structure it with Markdown. I do that all the time. The LLM, of course, understands it. XML, I'm not sure why OpenAI presents that as guidance, given that the underlying application programming interface, or API, used with every one of the LLMs, as far as I know, is JavaScript object notation, or JSON. But whatever you decide to do, you want to create boundaries and hierarchy by, structuring those prompts as much as possible, especially your first one. You also want to echo key terms from your context as you prompt to keep a bird in the LLM's ear, as it were, So you're prompting along, as we talked about during the start of this conversation, or you'll remember when I attached the screenshot, so you're reminding and forcing recall, forcing the LLM to scan the entire window, which it's always doing. It's always looking at the whole window and shining that spotlight. And the LLM, if you're going to retrieve something from the past content, wouldn't you assume that the LLM would definitely say, okay, we better not eject this from context? So it's like you could do fact checking. Hey, do you remember when I asked you this? And if it comes back with no, that's a clear indication that your context is shot and you're going to need to either do some serious refactoring to get back on track, or more likely, you're going to need to go into a new context window, a new chat, and hope for the best. Depending on the platform, you've got ways. The LLMs are standardizing to where they can remember past chats or reference past chats. You could open up a fresh context and say, let's pick up exactly where we left off, and let's start by you summarizing what we did in that previous chat. That solves two things. One, it brings that context as a summary nugget into your current empty context. And two, for me, it gives me a smoke test to verify that the LLM can, in fact, access that information. All right? You want to think about carefully and tactically, thoughtfully sculpting your LLM context. Just because you can dump a whole bunch of stuff into your window doesn't mean you should. Prune your garbage. You want to think about signal to noise ratio here. And like I said, pointing explicitly in your prompts, using the screenshot I gave you a little while ago, using the config that you gave me several turns ago. That is you, metaphorically, taking that spotlight throughout the overall context window and mentioning to the AI, make sure you don't forget this, basically. So we want to, as we end this lesson here, look at our conversation thread, not as a chat log, but as more of a radial roundtable discussion, like I said, where we use the spotlight to tactically and surgically not only just inject new content into the window, but take advantage of what's there. Remember that position matters, that U-curve metaphor, start and end wins, middle loses. That's kind of simplistic language, but you get what I'm talking about, I hope, when I use that verbiage. Structure and relevance here is the key. It's not raw length. You think, well, the AI is helping me write a blog post on Microsoft Responsible AI. I think it would be helpful if I dumped this 200-page white paper into context. You want to be more surgical than that. Maybe in another chat, dump the whole PDF and say, extract the parts that I need, and then you could use those nuggets into your current production chat. The long context lengths are, people are like, well, I myself have said, oh, cool, Google has 1 million token length. That means I've got a free reign on context. No, length can backfire, because it's going to wind up pushing to the boundaries of your window, and that's going to force the LLM to start the ejection process. And so we don't want to cause ourselves problems unnecessarily. That making some semblance of sense, I hope? Well, we're right on time to end the video, so at this point, I'll give the standard thank you. And subscribe. I definitely want you as a subscriber, and the notification bell, etc., etc., etc. I welcome your comments. I read those. And if you have any suggestions for future content, things that are hanging you up with cloud computing, DevOps, Gen AI, let me know. All right. See you next time. Bye.